I keep a phone in a drawer in my bedroom. It's an old phone, barely functional now, the kind of handset you'd find in a charity shop bin. I haven't used it in years, but I haven't thrown it away either. And I won't, because there are photos on it that I can't explain, and I can't stop looking at them. I'll get to the photos, but I need to tell this properly, from the beginning, because the context matters. Where I was, why I was there, what the night felt like. All of it matters, because if I just showed you the images cold, you'd glance at them and say, it's nothing. Pareidolia, a glitch, bad pixels. And you might be right. I've told myself those things hundreds of times. But the photos didn't happen in a vacuum. They happened inside an experience. And the experience is the part I can't shake. I live in Weston-super-Mare, southwest England, on the Bristol Channel coast. If you've heard of it at all, you probably picture the pier, the donkeys, maybe the mud flats when the tide goes out. It's a seaside town that had its moment about 100 years ago and has been gently fading ever since. Charity shops and seagulls, and that particular smell of salt and wet concrete. I've lived here most of my life. I know every road, every shortcut, every patch of scrubby park. It's not a sinister place. It's not an atmospheric place. It's just home. And at the southern end of Weston, there's a village called Uphill. Uphill feels separate from the rest of the town, even though technically it's within the boundary. It's older, quieter. There's a hill. The name isn't subtle. And at the top of that hill is the ruin of the old church, St. Nicholas. The tower still stands, and parts of the walls. But the roof is gone, and the interior is open to the sky. Grass grows between the old floor stones. Around it, spread across the slope and the flat ground below, is the graveyard. Headstones going back centuries, some so weathered. The inscriptions are just smooth grooves under your fingertips, completely illegible. During the day, it's a lovely spot. People walk their dogs up there. You can see across the estuary to Wales on a clear afternoon. It feels peaceful, historical, the way old English churchyards do. There's a gentle melancholy to it. Reading the names and dates and thinking about the lives that played out within a mile of where you're standing. Daytime Uphill is not a frightening place. I want to be clear about that, because it's important to everything that comes after. I'd never been there at night. I should say something about myself, because it's relevant. I've always had an interest in the paranormal, not in a crystals and incense way. I wouldn't call myself a believer. It's more that I find the subject genuinely interesting, the question of it. There's a part of me that wants there to be something more to the world than what we can measure, and there's a louder part that knows most of this stuff is nonsense. I sit in the middle, and I'm comfortable there. I like the question more than I need the answer. Uphill, as it turns out, has a history that goes well beyond the medieval church. The Romans were there. There's archaeological evidence of settlement on and around the hill, possibly a small temple. Some people think the site was sacred long before Christianity arrived. And with that kind of deep history comes stories. Figures seen near the church at night, a persistent sense of being watched on the path, cold spots in summer, the usual catalog. I'd read a few of these accounts over the years, never took them too seriously. But they'd settled into the back of my mind the way local legends do. So one night, I decided to go up. It wasn't planned. It was a weeknight, Tuesday or Wednesday. I honestly can't remember. I'd been at home. It was getting late. And I looked out the window and saw the kind of night that just felt right for it. There was mist, not thick fog, but a haze that softened the streetlights and made everything look slightly gauzy, slightly uncertain. Not a gale, but a steady, pushing wind you could hear in the gutters and the branches. And I just thought, tonight's the night. I put on my coat and boots. I grabbed my phone. This matters, the phone, because it was old, even then. A 3.2 megapixel camera, If that number doesn't mean anything to you, it means the photos it produced were grainy, low resolution, and essentially useless in low light. I knew that. I wasn't expecting to capture anything worthwhile. I think I just wanted a few atmospheric shots for my own amusement. The camera was an afterthought. The experience was the point. I drove to Uphill, 10 minutes, parked on the road near the lower church, the one still in use, around midnight, give or take. The streets were empty. That part of the village is quiet, even during the day, and at that hour there was nothing. No cars, no lit windows, just the wind, the mist, and the orange glow of street lamps growing sparser as I walked toward the path that leads up the hill. The path starts between hedgerows and opens out as you climb. In daylight, you'd see the Bristol Channel to your left and the Somerset levels to your right. But that night there was only darkness on either side. The ground underfoot was firm but uneven, old stone and compacted earth, and I could hear my footsteps clearly because there was nothing else competing. The wind moved in waves, gusting and dropping, and in the gaps between gusts, there was a silence that felt physical, like the air itself had substance. As I climbed, the streetlights fell away behind me. The only light was a vague ambient glow filtering through the mist from the town below, enough to see shapes but not details. The hedgerows gave way to open grass, and I could make out the church tower against the sky, a dark column against a deep, even gray. The sky wasn't black that night. The cloud and moisture caught whatever light existed and spread it into something flat and uniform, a ceiling rather than a sky. I wasn't scared. I was alert in the way you'd expect, given the circumstances, but it wasn't fear. It was more like a heightening of the senses. Everything registered more vividly than it normally would. The sound of the wind in the long grass, the texture of the churchyard wall under my trailing hand, cold, gritty, damp, the smell, wet earth, and something faintly mineral, like old stone after rain. The churchyard gate was unlocked. I pushed it open, and it swung silently on its hinges, which struck me because I'd been half expecting a creak. The absence of the sound felt stranger than the sound would have. Inside the churchyard walls, the wind changed. You could still hear it above, passing over the hilltop, but at ground level, it was muffled, sheltered. The mist seemed thicker here, pooling between the graves in slow, heavy drifts. The headstones were dark shapes, some upright, some leaning at drunken angles, some so eroded they were just lumps of stone pushing through the turf. I stood still for a moment, letting my eyes adjust, letting my ears tune in, and I felt something that I want to describe honestly, without overstating it. A sense of presence. Not a figure, not a sound, nothing I could point to. Just the unmistakable feeling that the space around me was not empty, the way an ordinary empty space is empty. It felt full, occupied by something I couldn't identify. I've been in plenty of dark, quiet places and not felt that. This was specific to that spot, that night. I began walking among the graves. The oldest or closest to the ruin, 17th century, possibly older. I touched a few as I passed, running my fingers over the cold, damp stone, feeling the indentations where words had been. The church tower loomed to my right, and through gaps in the remaining walls I could see into the old nave, just an open shell, with grass and shadow and mist drifting through, in slow currents. I didn't go inside. Something about the dark arch of the doorway, the way the mist moved through it, made me decide to stay out. I told myself it was because the footing inside might be uneven. That was probably true, but it wasn't the real reason, and I knew it wasn't. I started taking photos. No flash, partly because I didn't want to ruin my night vision, and partly, and this is harder to explain, because I felt like the flash would disrupt something, as if I were a guest in a space that was tolerating my presence, and a burst of artificial light would be a kind of rudeness. That sounds strange, I know. But that was the instinct. I took 15 or 20 shots over the next half hour. Headstones, the tower, wider views of the churchyard. Some of them I took without even looking through the screen, just holding the phone up and pressing the shutter. And I made a decision early on that felt important at the time, though I couldn't have told you why. I would not look at the photos until I got home. I didn't want to stand there reviewing images on a bright little screen. It would have broken something. The immersion, the rawness of being there. During those 45 minutes, nothing dramatic happened. I want to be clear about that. No apparition, no unexplained sound. No one else appeared. The mist drifted. The wind blew. The headstones stayed where they were. There were moments of unease, a tightness across my shoulders, an unwillingness to turn my back to certain corners. But I filed those under basic human instinct. Alone in a graveyard at midnight. Your nervous system does what it does. But there was one moment. I was near the northern edge of the churchyard, where the ground slopes away and the headstones thin out. I'd just taken a photo facing roughly east, toward the tower. As I lowered the phone, I caught movement at the very edge of my vision. Not in front of me, behind me and to the left, near the older graves by the ruin. I turned. Nothing. Headstones and mist. The mist was drifting, as it had been all night, and any thickening or shifting could have been what my peripheral vision caught. That's what I told myself. But in the same instant, something else happened. Something else happened. Something I almost didn't mention earlier, in the fraction of a second before I turned. While my peripheral vision was still registering the movement, but my conscious mind hadn't processed it yet. I felt a warmth on the left side of my face, not a breeze, not the cold. A warmth, as if someone were standing very close to me, close enough that I should have heard them breathing. I turned. No one was there, and then the silence changed. I don't know how else to put it. The wind dropped completely for a few seconds, and the silence that replaced it was different from ordinary silence. Ordinary silence is an absence. This was a presence. Like the space around me was holding its breath. Like the night itself had stopped to listen. It lasted maybe 5 seconds. Then the wind returned, and the feeling dissolved, and I was standing in a graveyard feeling vaguely foolish. I took 1 or 2 more photos. I believe I pointed the camera toward the area where I thought I'd seen movement, though I can't be certain, and then I called it a night. Not out of fear. The cold had worked its way into my hands and feet, and the whole experience had settled from novelty into simple discomfort. I was tired. I wanted tea. The walk down was ordinary. The drive home was ordinary. The empty streets, the sleeping town, the key in the front door, everything normal. I made the tea. Saturday on the sofa, opened the photos. The first several were what I expected. Dark, grainy, indistinct. Muddy rectangles of black and gray with the vague suggestion of headstone shapes. Some were so dark they were essentially nothing, just fields of digital noise. The camera had done exactly what I knew it would do. I was mildly disappointed in the flat, dispassionate way you are when something fails to meet even low expectations. I flicked through them one by one. I nearly stopped. I remember that clearly. I nearly closed the gallery and went to bed, and that would have been the end of it. I was tired and the photos were boring, and there was nothing to see, but I kept going. 4 or 5 left. The next image stopped me. I couldn't say why at first. It was another graveyard shot, taken from roughly the area where I'd felt the movement, where the warmth had touched my face. The church tower was visible in the upper right. The foreground was the usual mess of dark shapes I knew to be headstones, but on the left side of the frame, between 2 of the taller stones, there was something that didn't belong. My first thought was that it was a headstone I'd missed. Upright, somewhat taller than the ones around it, with a rounded top. That's all it was on the small screen, a slightly odd shape among other shapes. I almost scrolled past, but the proportions nagged at me. The old headstones in that part of the churchyard are wide relative to their height, squat, solid things. This shape was narrower, taller, more vertical than any stone I'd seen up there. I zoomed in. The phone's digital zoom was brutal. It just enlarged the pixels, making everything coarser. But even through that crude magnification, the shape resolved into something that made my stomach clench. It wasn't a headstone. The top was rounded in the wrong way, the way a head is rounded. And below it, the form widened slightly at the shoulders and then fell straight, the way fabric falls. Heavy fabric. Something draped. I sat there staring. The tea cooled beside me. The fridge hummed in the kitchen. I told myself, calmly and firmly, that it was a trick of the mist, a compression artifact, a fluke of the terrible camera. The image quality was so poor that anything could look like anything. Pareidolia, the brain seeing what it wants to see. I knew the word. I reminded myself of the science. I tried to accept it. Then I zoomed in further, into the area where a face would be if this shape were a figure. There was a face. I need to be precise. It was not a clear photographic face. It was not something you'd look at and say with certainty, that is a human face. It was a pattern of lighter and darker pixels in exactly the place a face would be. Two darker regions where eyes would sit, a lighter patch below and between them. And beneath that, an arrangement of tones that suggested not skin, not flesh, but structure, bone, that had stopped being a face a long time ago and become the architecture of one, the scaffolding without the surface. I put the phone down, picked it up, put it down. I went to the kitchen and poured the cold tea away and made a fresh cup, and the whole time my hands were going through the motions, while my mind ran a separate track entirely, turning the image over and over, trying to make it ordinary. When I sat back down, I looked at the remaining photos. Two were unremarkable, but one, taken moments later, from a slightly different angle, showed the same area of the churchyard, and the shape was there, the same vertical form, the same fall of what looked like heavy fabric, the same proportions that were wrong for a headstone and right for a person in a long robe. The word arrived in my mind and I couldn't get rid of it. The site's history flooded in behind it. The Romans on the hill, the pre-Christian settlement. And then the centuries after Rome fell, when the early monastic communities spread across the Somerset levels and the Bristol Channel coast. Glastonbury is only down the road. The whole region is layered with religious history stretching back well over 1,000 years. And uphill sits right in the center of it, on its little hill above the water, a place that human beings have treated as sacred or significant since before written records. I didn't sleep well, not because I was terrified. I wasn't, because my mind wouldn't stop swinging between two positions. The rational one, the images were noise and mist and bad technology and pattern, seeking biology. This is the position I would offer anyone else who showed me the same photos. And the other one, something was in that graveyard with me, something I didn't see, and the camera, that cheap, primitive, half-broken camera, that second position is the one that still makes me feel slightly ill, even now. Because if it's true, even as a slim possibility, then the figure was there the whole time, while I was walking among the headstones, while I was touching the cold stone, while I was standing in the mist feeling the wind and thinking my private thoughts. It was standing there, near the ruin, among the graves, 20 feet away. I've checked the timestamps. The photo with the figure was taken moments before I felt the movement, before the warmth on my face, 20 feet from where I was standing. If it was a person, a physical person, they were in my line of sight the entire time I was aiming the camera, and I saw nothing. My eyes passed over that spot and registered only headstones and mist. But the camera recorded something else. I showed the photos to a friend a few days later. I didn't tell him what I thought I saw. I just handed him the phone and said, "Have a look at these. I took them at Uphill the other night." He scrolled through, squinting, said they were rubbish photos of a graveyard. Fair enough. But when he reached the one with the shape, he stopped. He didn't speak for a moment. He spread his fingers to zoom in, and I watched his face change. "What is that?" "I don't know. Is that a person? I don't know." He zoomed in and out, tilted the phone, studied it. Then he said, "It looks like it's wearing a cloak or something, like a monk." He said the word. I hadn't suggested it, hadn't primed him. He assembled the same image from the same pixels, independently, and arrived at the same conclusion. You could call that pareidolia operating consistently. Two human brains finding the same false pattern in the same noise. That's a reasonable argument. I've used it on myself. Then he looked more closely and said, very quietly, "Mate, that looks like bone. That's not a face." He said it like he wished he hadn't seen it, and hearing the word out loud from someone else did something to me. It made it solid, because he was right. The face in the image, if it was a face, did not look alive. It looked like the face underneath a living face, hollow, angular, the architecture of something that had been dead for a very long time. We put the phone away and talked about football, but the conversation hasn't left me. Afterwards, I did some reading. Uphill's history more thoroughly than before. The Roman archaeological finds, the theory of a pre-Christian ritual site, and I looked for accounts from other people who'd had experiences on the hill. There weren't many, but I found some scattered across local history forums and old paranormal sites. One of them mentioned a monk. It was on a forum that looked like it hadn't been updated since the mid-2000s. An anonymous poster described walking near the Uphill churchyard at dusk and seeing a figure among the graves in dark robes, like a monk or a friar. They said it was standing motionless near the church wall, and that when they looked away and looked back, it was gone. This was posted years before my visit. No photos, just a description that matched what my camera had captured so precisely that I felt a cold crawl across my skin that had nothing to do with the temperature. Other accounts were vaguer. Unease on the hill after dark, a dog that refused to pass the churchyard gate at night, chanting heard on the wind, individually. None of it amounts to much. People get nervous in graveyards. Dogs are unpredictable. Wind sounds like all sorts of things, but together, the accounts form a pattern, and the pattern centers on that hilltop and that ruin in the ground beneath them. I went back to Uphill a week later. In daylight, I walked the same path, stood in the same spots, located the headstones from the photo by matching their positions against the tower. I found the gap between them where the figure had appeared. There was nothing there. Grass, a shallow depression in the earth. The low remains of the churchyard wall further back, no headstone, no object of any kind that could account for what the camera had shown me. I stood there in the sun with the wind blowing and the gulls calling and the estuary glinting in the distance, and I tried to feel what I'd felt that night. The presence, the weight of something watching, but there was nothing. The place was just a place. Old, quiet, beautiful in a weathered way. Just a place. And I didn't know whether that meant it was always just a place, or whether it was only something else at certain times, in certain conditions, when the mist comes in and the darkness falls, and the world thins out in ways that daylight doesn't allow. I've thought about going back at night, taking a proper camera, something with a good sensor and high resolution, pointing it at that same patch of ground, getting a clear answer, one way or the other, but I haven't done it. And the more I think about why, the more I realize I'm afraid of both outcomes. If a good camera shows me nothing, then the original photos were just noise, and everything I felt that night, the presence, the warmth on my face, the silence that seemed to hold its breath, was meaningless. Brain chemistry in a dark field, and if a good camera shows me something clear, something sharp and undeniable, a figure in heavy robes, with a face like stripped bone standing among headstones that have been there for 400 years, then the world has a layer to it that I didn't agree to, and I have to live with knowing that. So the phone stays in the drawer, and every few months I take it out and open the gallery and scroll to those images and zoom in. And every time I see the same thing, the shape, the drape of fabric, the face that isn't quite a face, and every time I'm caught in the same impossible middle ground, unable to commit to either explanation, unable to let it go. There's something else I've thought about since, something that bothers me more than the figure itself, more than the face. It's about the camera, the terrible, ancient 3.2 megapixel camera with its noisy sensor and its useless low light performance. I've wondered whether a better camera would have shown me anything at all, whether it was precisely the flaws in the technology, the grain, the noise, the way the sensor struggled and guessed and filled in gaps, that allowed something to register, like a net with a very specific weave, too fine and everything passes through clean, but with holes of a certain size, in a certain pattern, something gets caught, something that a perfect image would render invisible. I don't know what that means. I don't know if it means, I don't know. I still live in Weston-super-Mare. I still drive past the turning for uphill. On clear days, I glance up at the church tower on the skyline and feel nothing. It's just a ruin on a hill, but on misty nights, when the wind pushes through the town and the streetlights blur and soften, I look toward that hill and I think about what might be standing up there in the dark, among the graves, in the shelter of those broken walls, not waiting, not haunting, not performing for anyone, just standing there, the way it has perhaps always stood there, before the church, before the graves, before any of us, patient and silent and ancient, with its heavy robes and its face, like something unearthed, present in a way the living cannot be present, rooted in a depth of time the living cannot reach. And I think about how I walked right past it, how my eyes moved across the exact place where it stood and saw nothing at all, how every sense I have told me I was alone, and I think about that warmth on my face. Most nights I tell myself it was nothing, but I don't delete the photos, and lately, and this is the part I haven't told anyone, lately when I open them I've started to feel like the shape has shifted, just slightly, just enough that I can't be sure, the angle of the head maybe, the fall of the robe, as if each time I look, it has moved a fraction closer to the camera, a fraction closer to where I was standing. I measured it once, pixel by pixel, against the headstones, compared the first photo to the second, and the figure in the second image is closer. Not by much, but closer. I told myself it was the different angle, parallax, perspective, simple geometry, but I took those two photos within seconds of each other, and I didn't move toward it. So either the angle accounts for the difference, which it might, or the figure moved. I haven't opened the photos in a while now. Not because I've made peace with it, because the last time I looked, I zoomed in on the face, the skull, the hollow architecture of it, and for the first time, I had the feeling that it was not just an image I was looking at. It was a window, and something on the other side of it knew I was there. I put the phone back in the drawer. I haven't opened it since, but some nights, lying in bed, I hear the drawer shift. Just a faint sound, wood settling, the way furniture does in old houses when the temperature changes. Nothing unusual,